On March 14, SpaceX's Starship embarked on its third test flight from the Starbase facility in South Texas, marking another significant milestone in the development of what is currently the largest rocket ever built. This flight was particularly noteworthy for its demonstration of orbital velocity achievement and other key capabilities that are crucial for future lunar missions, especially within the framework of NASA's Artemis program, which aims to return humans to the Moon and beyond. One of the highlights of this test flight was the propellant transfer demonstration, an essential capability for sustaining longer missions in space by allowing spacecraft to refuel while in orbit. This technology is of particular interest to NASA as it aligns with the goals of the Artemis program by potentially extending the reach and duration of human exploration missions. The success of such a demonstration could pave the way for more ambitious missions, including those targeting the Moon, Mars, and possibly other destinations in the solar system. Before the launch, the teams conducted thorough final checks on weather conditions at T60 minutes. Given the favorable conditions, the launch director proceeded with the propellant loading process, filling the Starship and its Super Heavy booster with liquid methane and liquid oxygen. This process, completed by T45 minutes, is critical, not only because of the technical requirements, but also due to the sheer volume of propellant involved. The Super Heavy's 33 Raptor engines, upon ignition, consumed around 40,000 pounds of propellant per second. At T+2 minutes and 44 seconds, the stage separation occurred. This was executed flawlessly, with most of the booster engines shutting down except for 3, allowing for a controlled separation. Immediately after, the upper stage's 6 engines ignited, marking the start of its journey to orbit. During its ascent, the booster initiated a boost-back burn, reorienting itself for a return to Earth. Although the feed was lost shortly before landing, this maneuver is critical for SpaceX's vision of reusable rockets. The launch generated significant attention, not only for its visual spectacle with the water suppression system at the launch pad, but also for the critical technologies being tested. The stability of Starship during this operation is paramount, as any adverse effects could jeopardize the mission's success. NASA and SpaceX engineers will review the flight data in detail to assess the performance of the propellant transfer. They are particularly interested in the fluid dynamics within the tanks and the conditions under which the Raptor engines receive the propellant. This analysis is crucial for ensuring the engines can be reliably restarted in orbit. During the coast phase, unexpected vehicle roll rates necessitated abandoning a planned on-orbit relight of a single Raptor engine. Despite losing the vehicle during this phase, the data gathered until the loss of signal provided SpaceX with valuable insights. The live feed showed the heat shield tiles and the effects of re-entry. SpaceX has a plan to launch 5 Starships in 2024. However, SpaceX is expanding its launch sites to help manage this tight timeline. At the forefront of this expansion efforts is the construction of a massive new facility at the Starbase complex in Brownsville, Texas. Musk has announced a $100 million investment into a large-scale 5-story industrial complex. The proposed Starbase office complex is set to cover an area equivalent to 15 football fields. For context, this size is about a quarter of Boeing's largest assembly building, where the 777 aircraft are built. According to the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, the project aims to enhance SpaceX's manufacturing, with construction slated to start soon, and a completion target set for early 2025. This new facility will include office space and a dedicated factory for the Starship project, covering more than 1.3 million square feet in total. The project's location near the launch site adds logistical convenience, supporting the increased pace of production and launch operations. On the other hand, Starship launched for the 3rd time last week, made it to space, but then burned up on re-entry. NASA's SpaceX Crew 7 successfully returns to Earth. A brand new Japanese rocket exploded seconds into its maiden flight. Electron launched the last of 3 dedicated launches for the Strix constellation. A Long March 2C suffered a partial failure when attempting to deliver 2 satellites to lunar orbit, and SpaceX's Starlink constellation grew by another 23 satellites. Yeah, so there's really not any point skirting around the biggest event of the past week, right? That's right, we saw the orbital launch attempt of a Long March 2C, which carried 2 payloads. Okay, obviously, it was of course Starship Flight 3, the 3rd ever launch of the world's biggest and most powerful rocket. As the clock counted down, I was a bit worried we might have another SN-11 on our hands again, as the launch area was completely shrouded in fog. But as we got close to T-0, things had thankfully started to clear up. We had engine ignition and then liftoff, and I think for many people our eyes immediately jumped to the Raptor engine diagram on the Stream UI to check that yes, all 33 Raptors were lit. And then we got something a little unexpected. On flight views. Something that was absent from the flight to stream. I love seeing how quickly this thing screamed through the cloud layer, watching them vanish below, and then we got an uninterrupted on-board view of the hot stage event, wherein the 6 Raptors of the upper stage lit while still attached to Super Heavy Booster 10 before the two separated. Now at this point we were wondering if Booster 10 would terminate in a similar manner to Booster 9, but no, it seemed to successfully steer itself down towards the Gulf of Mexico with those huge grid fins. Though towards the end it did start rolling back and forth quite aggressively, and the Raptor engines ultimately failed to reignite, resulting in the booster slamming into the ocean at about 1 kilometer per second. So, we're not going to buff out that, to be honest. Anyway, onto the Starship, it then made it to space on a suborbiter trajectory. The plan was never to actually make it to full orbit for safety reasons, but SpaceX were planning on relighting a Raptor engine while in space in order to enter a transatmospheric trajectory, but unfortunately the planned Raptor restart was cancelled. That wasn't the only test that SpaceX wanted to run in space though. The other 2 tests were reportedly a success. A propellant transfer test was started and run to completion, and the payload bay door was opened and closed too, although the latter looks like it might need some more work. It really looked like the door struggled to open fully, and I'm not too sure if it ever managed to successfully close at the end of the test, though admittedly the camera angle makes it a little bit hard to tell. Then it was time for re-entry. I don't think any of us expected the views here to be so spectacular. Seeing those plumes of plasma erupting around the heat shield was insane. Speaking of the heat shield, it looks like Ship 28 retained a lot more of its tiles than Ship 24 and 25, though some still did fall off as you can see. That wasn't really the biggest problem the ship was facing at this stage though, it was in a massive roll during re-entry. It is a bit hard to tell from the raw video, but Twitter user Othello uploaded a stabilized video that does a really good job at showing just how extreme the roll was. Yep, I mean, you guys already knew this by now, but the ship did not survive re-entry. Communications was lost at around 65 kilometers altitude. The hypersonic re-entry environment is a brutal one, Mach 25, so to be honest I would have been more surprised if this worked the first time. I think Starship re-entry is definitely going to be one of, if not the, biggest hurdles that SpaceX will need to overcome. Hopefully I'll be able to do it for Flight 4, but we'll have to wait and see. Flight 4 though is hopefully not too far away, certainly hopefully a lot closer to us than the amount of time we had to wait between Flight 2 and 3. Because by all accounts Flight 3 was much more successful than Flight 2. We of course got much closer to safe splashdown of the booster. It didn't just explode like it did in Flight 2, and we of course saw that amazing re-entry footage of Ship 28. The next launch date is of course very dependent on whether or not SpaceX can address the problems faced by Flight 3, namely that out-of-control spinning of the ship on re-entry, as does a few other things like maybe adding some more grease to that door mechanism. At this point the ship for Starship's 4th flight, Ship 29, was still present at the launch site. Ship 29 used the time there to perform a quick spin prime test of what looked like all 6 of its engines before being removed from Stand B and getting rolled back to the production site to not be too close to the full stack once launch approaches. Ship 29 has already completed a 6-engine spin prime test, so just needs to complete a static fire before it's good to go, and Super Heavy Booster 11 is on engine installation Stand 2 in Mega Bay 1, awaiting its rollouts to the launch pad for spin prime and static fire testing before it's ready to. In fact, Booster 12 and Ship 30 are also coming along really quickly too, with the booster receiving its engines on engine installation Stand 1, and the ship awaiting its engine install at the production site. Now crucially, did Stage 0 survive? Well, for the most part, yes. NASA spaceflight was soon at the scene and captured some great views of the Flight 3 aftermath, as well as this amazing video of the launch. The orbital launch mount looks intact though, but it will need another coat of paint to get it back to how it was pre-launch, but otherwise everything looks good. Though it's a bit early to be conclusive, but there's no sign of, manifestly obvious damage, aside from a few cosmetic imperfections here and there. While Starship may have burned up upon re-entry, luckily the same can't be said for Crew Dragon Endurance, which safely returned to the 4 members of NASA's SpaceX Crew 7 mission from the International Space Station last week. On Monday, NASA astronaut Jasmine Mogbili, ESA astronaut Andreas Mogensen, JAXA astronaut Satoshi Furukawa, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Konstantin Borisov all made their way on board the spacecraft before the hatch was closed behind them. About 2 and a bit hours later, the Crew Dragon autonomously undocked from the space station's Harmony module, departing the station after being docked there for 197 days, 2 hours and 4 minutes. And too long after this, a deal-bit burn was made and the spacecraft made a successful atmospheric re-entry followed by parachute deployment and splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Florida, bringing a successful close to SpaceX's 7th operational mission for NASA's Commercial Crew program. Recovery ships were soon at the scene, and the crew successfully disembarked the capsule roughly 20 hours after boarding. In addition to another masterful Commercial Crew mission, SpaceX also completed another Falcon 9 launch. On Saturday, the rocket blasted off from Launch Complex 39A at Cape Canaveral, carrying 23 Starlink V2 Minis 2 Shell 6. As always, stage separation was quickly followed by the first stage, performing a boost back and landing burn, coming down to rest on the shortfall of Gravitas drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean. It's nearly the big 2-0 for this first stage, B-1062, as this was its 19th mission overall. Crazy numbers really. The Rocket Lab had a successful 45th Electron launch last week. On Tuesday, they launched their all-night-long mission from Mahia, New Zealand. On board, the Electron was the Strix 3 Earth observation satellite, and this was Rocket Lab's third and final of 3 dedicated launches for Synspective Strix constellation. The Strix constellation was developed through Japan's IMPACT program and is a pioneering effort in synthetic aperture radar technology, providing high-res Earth imagery at a fraction of the cost of conventional satellites, and Synspective ultimately won the constellation to consist of 30 satellites by the late 2020s. For this particular Electron launch, no first-stage recovery attempt was made. Starship was kind of a success, kind of a failure, as was China Aerospace Science Technology Corporation's Long March 2C launch last week. The vehicle lifted off on Wednesday from the Xichang Launch Complex, carrying the distant retrograde orbit A and B technology demonstration satellites to lunar orbit. However, the rocket suffered an anomaly with its YZ-1's upper stage, which meant that it didn't reach lunar orbit, instead only being able to place the satellites into low Earth orbit. After launch failures aside, we also had a total launch failure last week as well. The same day as Long March 2C, we saw the maiden flight of the Kairos rocket, a Japanese solid-fuel rocket designed to be able to place smallsats weighing up to 1/4 metric ton to low Earth orbit, built by the private Japanese company Space One. For its first flight, it carried the Rapid Launch Small Satellite payload, but unfortunately, the rocket exploded pretty much immediately after liftoff, with automatic flight determination system activating its T+5 seconds. This energetic end to the mission did result in fires and damage to the launch area. Hopefully, Space One can figure out what went wrong here, and we can see another launch attempt of this vehicle in the not-too-distant future. I guess this is another good reminder that space can sometimes be hard. And that's about it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and that's all for today's update. If you enjoyed watching and found it useful, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. And if you want to support our channel and if you want to be up to date, you can become an exclusive member, so click on our perks through the link in the description below. Thanks to watching and see you next time.